A son keeps the business. You were always just help. My father said it across the table on Father's Day, and he was smiling when he said it. He slid a folder toward my brother while he said it. Inside that folder were papers that signed the print shop over to Curtis, the shop I had run for 11 years. My name was nowhere on them. 40 guests were watching. My father had timed it for the toast. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up the pen, looked at the line where my signature was supposed to go as a witness, and set it back down. Curtis laughed. He thought the laugh was the end of it. It wasn't. 6 weeks earlier, I had walked into a county records office for a reason none of them knew. What my lawyer was about to take out of her bag would empty the smile off my father's face faster than anything I could have said. But that afternoon, he still thought he'd won. I'm Adelaide Brenner, 36, and the quiet daughter who balanced the books and never raised her voice was the only person in that room who'd already read the deed. Let me tell you how the morning started. The party was in my parents' backyard, the same yard where I'd learned to ride a bike, the same yard where my father once told me a girl didn't need a head for numbers. Folding tables in 2 long rows, paper plates, a banner my mother had ironed flat. Lawrence Print and Sign had been a Brenner business for 31 years, and half the town had worked a job there at some point, so half the town came. I got there early to set up chairs. That was the role. Adelaide sets up. Adelaide stacks. Adelaide makes the coffee. I had a master's in accounting, and I was making the coffee, and I made it without complaint because that was easier than the fight. Curtis showed up at noon in a new truck. He parked it on the lawn where everyone could see the dealer plate. My brother is 2 years younger than me, and he has never once closed out a register correctly. He waved at me like a man waving from a parade float. "Big day," he said. "It's Dad's day," I said. "It's Father's Day." "Sure," he said, "that too." I should have heard it then, the two. But I had a tray of deviled eggs in my hands and a long table to cover, and I let it go the way I'd let 1,000 things go. My father, Walter Brenner, 64, sat at the head of the table like he sat at the front of the shop, in a chair that was always a little higher than everyone else's. He'd founded Lawrence Print in 1994 with a single second-hand press and a loan he never stopped reminding us about. He was not a cruel man the way you imagine cruel. He was worse. He was a man who decided how the world worked in 1965 and never updated the file. To him, a son ran a business. A daughter helped a son run a business. I had spent 11 years proving the math wrong, and he had spent 11 years refusing to look at the math. By 2 o'clock, the burgers were gone and the toasts had started. My uncle said something about Walter being the hardest working man in the county. My mother dabbed her eyes. Curtis stood up with a glass even though Curtis had contributed nothing to the day but a truck on the lawn. And then my father stood and reached under his chair and brought out a folder. A green folder. I knew that green. It was the folder color we used at the shop for anything legal. "While everyone's here," he said, "I've got an announcement. A handing over." The yard got quieter. 40 faces turned. What happened in the next 10 minutes is the reason I'm telling you any of this. Before I take you into it, you have to understand what Lawrence Print actually was by 2025 and what it had been when I walked back into it. I'd left town at 18 the way you leave a town that's already decided who you are. State school, accounting degree, then a CPA and 4 years at a regional firm 2 states away. I was good at it. I was the person partners trusted with the messy clients, the ones whose books looked like a crime scene. I made order out of disorder for a living, and I was paid well to do it. Then, in 2014, my father had a heart attack on the shop floor at 6 in the morning, alone, and lay there 40 minutes before the first employee found him. He lived. The shop nearly didn't. I came home for what I thought was a month. The books were the crime scene now. My father had run Lawrence Print for 20 years on instinct and a checkbook, and instinct had stopped paying the vendors. He owed the paper supplier $11,000. He owed the landlord 2 months. The big 4-color press, the one that did the actual money work, had a service contract that had lapsed, and a roller had gone, and a dead press is just a very large table. "I'll stay till it's stable," I told my mother. That was 11 years ago. Here is the math, because the math is the whole story, and I want you to hold it the way I held it. When I took over the office in 2014, Lawrence Print did about $310,000 a year in revenue and netted almost nothing. By 2024, it did 1.2 million and netted just under 200,000. I didn't do that with charm. I did it with a spreadsheet. I dropped the dying retail copy counter and chased commercial contracts. I landed the county school district's print account in 2017. $40,000 a year, renewed every 2 years since. I landed 3 regional hospitals' forms and signage in 2019. I put the whole front end online so a contractor in the next county could order yard signs at midnight. I renegotiated the paper contract down 9%. I caught a vendor double billing us $1,300 a month and had been doing it for a year and a half. My father's name was on the sign. My work was in the ledger. And the deal, the thing I told myself made it bearable, was simple. My parents owned the business. When they were done, it would pass to the 2 of us, and since I ran it, since I had rebuilt it from a corpse, my part of it was understood. Understood. That's a word I used a lot back then. Nothing in writing, just understood. I was paid a manager's salary, $62,000 a year, running a company doing $1.2 million. Curtis, who came in maybe twice a month to check on things, was paid a consulting fee of $18,000 a year for checking on things. I knew the number because I cut the checks. That's the part where you start to feel it, isn't it? I felt it every 15th and 30th of the month when I signed my brother's check for doing nothing out of money I had earned. I want you to remember that consulting fee. It comes back. 3 years ago, something changed, and it changed because of a Tuesday. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March, the kind of slow afternoon where you finally get to the filing. The landlord's company had been bought by a bigger property group, and the new group sent over a packet to update their records. Forms, leases, standard. I sat down to fill them out, and I got to a line that asked for the legal owner of record of the property at 14 Hartwell Street. The building, the shop's own building. And I realized I had never actually seen our deed. If you've made it this far and your own family ever made you feel like the help in a house you built, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, just so this story finds the next person who needs it. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there, because I read every one of them. Now let me get back to that Tuesday, because that line on that form is where everything turned. I assumed the building was my father's. Everyone assumed it. My father talked about my building the way he talked about my business. But I'm an accountant, and assuming is how you end up testifying. So that afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office to pull the deed for our own address just to fill in a form correctly. It took the clerk 4 minutes. She printed it and slid it across the counter, and I read it standing right there at the window, and I had to read it twice. The building at 14 Hartwell Street was not owned by my father. It was owned by my grandmother, my father's mother, Constance Brenner, who had died in 2011, 3 years before my father's heart attack, before I ever came home. The deed had her name on it, recorded in 1994, the year my father started Lawrence Print. He hadn't bought the building. His mother had bought it and let him use it. And when she died, the deed had never been transferred. It still sat in the name of a dead woman. I drove back to the shop with that printout on the passenger seat like it was a living thing. For a week, I didn't tell anyone. I told myself I was being thorough. The truth is, I was scared, and I didn't know yet what I was scared of. A building owned by a dead woman is a problem waiting in a drawer. Someone had to fix it, and the someone, as always, was me. Twice that week, I almost walked into my father's office and put the printout on his desk. That's the instinct when you find a problem in a family business. You bring it to the owner. He was the owner. He'd want to know the building was still titled to his dead mother, that there was a probate loose end, that we needed to clean it up. Both times I stopped at the door. I stopped because of something small. The first time I heard him on the phone with Curtis, laughing, saying, "Your sister'll handle the paperwork. She likes that stuff." The second time he was telling a customer that he'd built this place from nothing, all by himself. All by himself. In the building his mother bought him, and I thought, if I bring him a problem with that building, the first thing he'll do is decide how to keep it, and the second thing he'll do is have me file whatever paper makes it his, and I'll sign it because I always sign it. So I didn't knock. I went back to my desk, and I kept pulling records, and that was the moment, though I didn't name it yet, that I stopped being the help and started being the auditor. So I started pulling Constance Brenner's records. And the deed wasn't the only thing my grandmother had left in a drawer. My grandmother and I had been close in a way that embarrassed my father. She was a sharp old woman who'd run a fabric store for 30 years before he ever owned a press, and she did her own books, and she'd taught me to do mine at her kitchen table when I was 9. Walter thought numbers were beneath a woman. His own mother had paid for the building he built his manhood on. He never saw the joke. When she died in 2011, I was 2 states away and didn't come home for long. The estate, I was told, was handled. My father handled it. Of course he did. But the recorder's office is public, and probate is public, and an accountant who knows where to look can reconstruct almost anything. Over the next 2 weeks, on my lunch breaks, in a parking lot with a sandwich I didn't eat, I reconstructed my grandmother's estate. Here is what I found, and I'm going to give it to you the way it came to me because the order is the cruelty. Constance Brenner died with a will. The will named an executor. The executor was not my father. The executor was a lawyer in the next town named Diane Halloran, the same lawyer my grandmother had used for 30 years. The will had been filed. It had been probated. And the building at 14 Hartwell Street had not gone to my father at all. It had gone into a small family trust with a single named beneficiary listed to inherit it outright on a specific date. The beneficiary was me. I sat in that parking lot and I did the thing I do when the world tilts. I took out my phone and I opened the calculator and I figured out exactly what I was holding. The building, at current commercial rates for our block, was worth about $410,000. Lawrence Print paid rent on it. Paid rent. Every month for 11 years, I had cut a rent check of $3,100 to a property account my father controlled for a building that, on paper, belonged to a trust that belonged to me. I had been paying my own father rent on my own building. I did the next piece of math because I couldn't stop. $3,100 a month times 12 times the 11 years I'd been signing the check. $409,200, plus what had been paid before I came home. My father had been collecting rent on a building he didn't own since the day his mother died. I want to be careful here, because for a long time I told myself there was an innocent version. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe the lawyer never told him. Maybe the will got lost. So I went looking for the version where my father was innocent. I am telling you that because I want you to understand I did not want this. I wanted a paperwork error. I wanted a dead woman's lawyer who dropped the ball. I wanted anything but what I found. I started with the property account. The rent went somewhere, and I had access to the books, so I traced it. Every month for 11 years, $3,100 left at the Lawrence Print operating account and landed in a separate account labeled in my father's hand, CB Property, Constance Brenner Property. He'd named the account after his dead mother and then spent it like it was his. I pulled the statements. The money didn't sit there. It moved. A boat in 2016. A second truck in 2019, the one before Curtis's. A down payment on a lake cabin in 2021 that my mother called your father's reward for a lifetime of work. A lifetime of work, paid for with rent on a building he didn't own. I printed every statement. I 3-hole punched them. I am an accountant. Grief, for me, comes with a binder. There was one line that stopped me cold. In December of 2018, the year I'd worked 60 straight days to land the hospital contracts, my father had withdrawn $15,000 from the CB property account on December 23rd. The memo line in his handwriting said, Christmas Curtis down payment. A down payment on a condo for the son who checked on things twice a month. That same Christmas, my gift from my parents had been a gift card to the office supply store. $60. I'd thanked them. I'd used it to buy toner for the shop. I did the math on that one out loud, alone in my car, just to hear how it sounded. $15,000 to the son who did nothing. $60 to the daughter who did everything. Both of it pulled, in a sense, from the rent I cut every month on a building that was already mine. That was the day the fear turned into something colder and more useful. The next thing I found was older, and it changed the shape of the whole story. I pulled my grandmother's full probate file. Buried in it was a second recorded document I hadn't expected, a promissory note from 1994. Constance Brenner had not given my father the building. She had purchased it and then, on paper, loaned my father the use of it, with a note stating that if the business were ever transferred outside the direct line of her grandchildren, the property reverted to the trust. She had written, in 1994, a fence around the exact thing my father was about to try 31 years later. She had known her son. She had known him better than I did. I want to be careful here because for a long time I still told myself there was an innocent version. Maybe he never read it. Maybe nobody ever told him in plain words. Then I found the letter. Diane Halloran's office still had the file. When I called her and told her who I was, there was a silence on the line. And then she said, "Adelaide, I have been waiting 11 years for this call." She asked me to come in person. She wouldn't say more on the phone. So I drove the hour to the next town to a small office over a hardware store, and I met a woman in her 70s with reading glasses on a chain, and a steadiness I recognized because my grandmother had had it too. She had a copy of a certified letter she'd sent my father in February of 2012, 3 months after the funeral. She slid it across the desk and let me read it myself. It informed him, in plain language, that the building was held in trust for his daughter Adelaide, that he was permitted to operate the business there, and that the trust matured and conveyed to me outright on my 36th birthday. My 36th birthday. I was 33 when I read that letter. I had 3 years to wait, and I hadn't even known I was waiting. Then Diane reached into a drawer and put a second thing on the desk, and this is the object I carried in my head through everything that came after. It was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, with my name on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. To Adelaide, to be given when the trust matures. She wrote it the same week she signed the trust, Diane said. She told me, "My son will fight this. He'll tell the girl it isn't real. When the day comes, give her this so she knows it's real, and it's hers." I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I held it on my lap for the whole hour-long drive home, the way I'd held the deed printout, and the envelope sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 2 more days while I worked up the nerve. I should tell you what it cost Diane to hand me that envelope, because she is the reason I had anything at all, and she had her own skin in this. My father had spent years telling people in town that the old lawyer who handled his mother's estate had been confused at the end, that she'd made a mess of it. It was groundwork. If I ever came asking, the story would already be planted that Diane Halloran couldn't be trusted. By helping me, she was standing up to a man who'd been quietly poisoning her name for a decade. "He'll come after my reputation," she said when I asked if she was sure. "Let him. I've got the file. The file doesn't get confused." She took off her glasses. "Your grandmother paid me to protect you. I'm 30 years late starting, but I'm not going to be late finishing." That was the first ally I had who'd known the truth longer than I had. My father had read that letter in 2012. He'd signed for it. The green card with his signature was in Diane's file. And then he'd come home and told the family the estate was handled, and he'd kept collecting rent, and 12 years later he was going to sign the whole business to my brother on Father's Day because a son keeps the business and a daughter is just help. On the 3rd night I opened my grandmother's envelope. I'm not going to read you the whole thing. Some of it is mine. But there was one line I will carry until I die, because it named the thing I'd never let myself say out loud. She wrote, "I am not leaving you a building, Adelaide. I am leaving you the proof that I saw you. Your father will spend his life telling you what you are. I am putting it in writing so the day comes when you don't have to argue." I sat at my kitchen table, the same kind of table she'd taught me numbers at when I was 9, and I cried in a way I had not cried in years. Not because of the money. Because for my entire life I had wanted exactly one thing from my family that I could never get them to give, which was to be looked at and counted, and a woman who'd been dead for 11 years had counted me before any of them ever would. That was the wound. I'd carried it so long I'd stopped feeling its weight, the way you stop feeling a ring you never take off. I dried my face. I put the letter in the binder with the bank statements because that's who I am. And I made a decision that I would not spend the next 3 years arguing. I would spend them ready. Now here's where I have to tell you what I did next, and it's not what you think, because I didn't do it fast. I'm an accountant. I did it correctly. I did not storm into the shop. I did not call my father. I sat with it for 2 days, and on the 3rd day, I called the only person in my life I trusted completely with something this big. Her name is Renata Voss. We'd met at the regional firm, two junior accountants surviving the same brutal partners, and she'd left the numbers and gone to law school and become an estate attorney, which is either a coincidence or the universe paying attention. She is the calmest person I have ever known, and she has a memory like a vault. I drove 3 hours to her office on a Saturday, and I put the deed, the will, the trust document, the bank statements, and Diane Halloran's certified letter on her desk in a row. I'd brought the binder. Of course I'd brought the binder. Renata read them slowly. She is not a gasper. She read the bank statements last, the boat and the truck and the cabin, and she set them down and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose for a second, which for Renata is the equivalent of throwing a chair. He didn't just keep the building from you, she said. He monetized it for 11 years. That's not a misunderstanding, Adelaide. A misunderstanding doesn't buy a lake cabin. When she finished, she squared the pages and looked up. Adelaide, she said, do you understand what you're holding? I think so. You're not holding a grievance, she said. You're holding title. This building is yours, or it will be on your birthday, and there is nothing your father can do about it because the conveyance isn't a gift he controls. It's a trust your grandmother created and a court already approved. He's about to sign the business to my brother. She tapped the deed. He can sign the business to whoever he wants. The business is his to give. But the business doesn't own the building. The business rents the building from you. She let that sit. Has he told them where they're going to operate after he hands it over? I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on the theft that I'd missed the trap inside it. If my father gave Lawrence Print to Curtis, he was giving Curtis a company that operated out of a building Curtis had no right to be in. I have a daisy line I think about all the time now. Renata said it that Saturday, and it's the calmest, most devastating thing anyone has ever said to me. She set the deed down and she said, You don't have to take anything from him. You just have to stop giving it to him. We can pause here for a second because I want to ask you something honestly. If you found out your own father had been quietly billing you rent on a building your grandmother left you and was about to hand the family business to the brother who never worked a day in it, what would you do first? Would you call him? Would you wait? Tell me below, because I genuinely want to know, and most people are surprised by their own answer. Renata laid out my options the way I'd once laid out a client's. Cold, numbered. Option 1, she said. You can move now. We send your father a formal letter, we establish the trust, you demand back rent, you become his landlord today. It's clean and it's legal and it'll feel like nothing because it'll happen in envelopes nobody sees. She looked at me. Option 2, you wait. Your birthday is in 6 weeks. On that day, the trust matures and the building conveys to you outright. No court, no contest, automatic. After that, you own the floor your father's been standing on for 30 years, free and clear. And whatever he chooses to do at that party in the meantime, he'll be doing it on borrowed ground. I thought about 40 folding chairs and a banner my mother ironed. He's going to do it in front of everyone, I said. He's going to humiliate me in front of the whole town. Yes, Renata said, he probably is. And if I wait, I let him. You let him, she agreed. Once, in public. And then you answer in public. She closed the file. A symmetry, Adelaide. He uses a party. You use a deed. He brings a folder. You bring a recorded title and the lawyer who's been holding your grandmother's letter for 11 years. He says it with a smile. You say it with a court file number. Pick your weapon. It doesn't have to match his. I chose to wait. I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't strategy. It was that for 11 years I had been quiet. And being quiet had cost me $400,000 and my own name on my own work, and I had decided I was going to be quiet exactly one more time, on the day of his choosing, and then never again. I didn't say a word to my father. I didn't say a word to Curtis. I went to work every morning and I cut the rent check, $3,100, knowing what I knew, and the knowing changed the check. It used to feel like a loss. Now it felt like a receipt. Evidence accumulating on his side of the ledger. The 6 weeks were not quiet, though, and I want to be honest that I didn't spend them waiting like a saint. I spent them preparing, the way I'd prepare for an audit I knew was going to get ugly. Renata and I built a file, not a notebook of grievances, A file, the kind that holds up. The recorded deed, certified. The trust instrument, certified. Diane's 2012 letter and the green return receipt. My grandmother's competency letter. The probate record. And then the part that was mine alone to build, because I was the only one with access to the books. 11 years of rent checks, the CB property account statements, the boat and the truck, and the lake cabin traced line by line. I scanned all of it. I made 3 copies. I kept one set in a safe deposit box under my own name, because I'd learned from my own family that the person who controls the documents controls the story, and I was done letting my father control the story. Renata walked me through what would happen at the conveyance. The trust matured automatically. No judge had to bless it. On my birthday, the building was mine the way the sun comes up, whether or not anyone wanted it to. He can't stop the conveyance, she told me on the phone one night. The only thing he can do is try to muddy the title before the date so it doesn't transfer clean. If he's going to move, that's when he'll move. She'd told me exactly what was coming. I just didn't believe my own father would do it until he did. I also did something I'd never done in 11 years at that shop. I quietly made sure that every contract that mattered, the school district, the hospitals, the big commercial accounts, was tied to me, not to the Brenner name. To Adelaide Brenner, the account manager the clients actually called when something broke. I didn't poach anything. I just stopped pretending my work belonged to someone else's sign. If the business ever changed hands, the clients would follow the person who'd answered the phone at midnight, and that person had never once been my father or my brother. But waiting 6 weeks meant 6 weeks of him not knowing what I knew, and that meant 6 weeks where he could still make it worse. He did. 2 weeks before the party, my father called me into his office at the shop. The office I actually used. He just sat in it sometimes. He had Curtis with him. "We need to talk about the future," he said. I sat. I kept my hands still. "You've done a fine job keeping things tidy," he said. Tidy. 11 years and $1 million in growth, and the word was tidy. But the business needs an owner who can be its face. Curtis is going to step up. You'll stay on, of course. Help him with the books. He'll need the help. Curtis was looking at his phone. "What's my title?" I asked. Calm, an accountant asking for a line item. My father blinked. "Your title? If Curtis owns it, what am I?" "Your family," he said. "You're his sister. You'll be the office manager." There it was. 11 years, and he'd moved me down a rung to make room for a man who couldn't run a register. "And my salary?" "We'll keep you where you are," he said, like that was generosity. 62,000 while my brother took the company. I said, "Okay, just that." "Okay." I watched his shoulders relax because in his whole life, my okay had only ever meant surrender. This is the part I keep, the small private thing. After they left, I sat in that office and I looked at the framed photo on the wall, the one of my grandmother standing in front of her fabric store in 1979, arms crossed, not smiling, owning the place. I'd hung it there myself years ago, and my father had never once asked who she was. And I said out loud to a photograph, 2 weeks, Gran. That was the only time I cracked. My voice did a thing I didn't let it do in front of people. Then I straightened the frame and went back to work. Curtis came to see me alone 3 days later, which had never happened in our adult lives. He sat on the edge of my desk, the way he sat on everything, like he was doing it a favor. "Look," he said, "Dad wants this clean, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a thing this week, a consulting agreement, basically your job description under me, and a non-compete, so you can't go start a print shop down the road." He smiled. "Standard stuff. I had a guy draw it up." He slid 2 pages across my desk. He'd had a lawyer draw up a non-compete to keep me, the person who built the company, from ever competing with the company. He didn't see the joke either. They never do. "And there's a thing about the books," he added, casual. "Dad wants the financial logins changed over to me before the party, so it's a clean handoff. You'll give me those by Friday." There it was. The counterattack, dressed up as housekeeping. They wanted my signature locking me in and my access locked out, all before the day they'd already decided would be a celebration. If I'd been anyone else, it would have worked. "Sure," I said. Leave it with me. I did not sign it. I did not change a single login. But I learned something from those 2 pages, and it was the thing that nearly cost me everything 4 days later. Because I'd said sure and meant no, and my father took my sure to the bank. I thought the hard part was waiting. I was wrong. The hard part came 4 days before the party, and it nearly broke the whole thing. It started with the bank. On the Wednesday before the party, a teller I'd known for years called me, off the record, because she'd seen something that worried her. My father had come in that morning and tried to move the entire balance of the CB property account, the rent account, into a personal account in his and Curtis's names. He'd tried to empty it before I could ever claim it. The teller had flagged it for review because the account name didn't match the destination, and the transfer was sitting in a hold. But that wasn't the part that froze me. That afternoon, Renata called, and for the first time since I'd known her, she did not sound calm. "Your father's been busy," she said. "He filed a quiet title action this morning. He's claiming the 2011 trust is invalid, that your grandmother lacked capacity when she signed it, that he's the rightful owner by 30 years of possession. He's got a lawyer arguing adverse possession and undue influence." "He can't win that," I said. "The will was probated. Diane?" "He doesn't have to win it," Renata said, and that's when the floor dropped. "Adelaide, if there's a cloud on the title when your birthday comes, the trust doesn't convey clean. A pending action freezes the conveyance. He's not trying to win. He's trying to delay it past your birthday so the automatic transfer never happens, and then drag it out for 2 years in court while he keeps control of the building and bleeds the trust dry on legal fees." She paused. "It's the same play. He doesn't need to be right. He needs you to give up." For one night, I believed I'd lost. I sat at my kitchen table with the binder open, and I genuinely thought, he's going to do it again. He's going to take the thing my grandmother left me the same way he took everything else, slowly, in envelopes nobody sees, by simply outlasting me. I'd waited 3 years. He could make me wait 3 more, and 10 more after that. I was 36 years old, and I was right, and I was about to lose anyway, because being right has never once been enough in my family. I called Diane Halloran at 9 at night and apologized for the hour. "He filed against the trust," I said. "He's saying Gran wasn't of sound mind." There was a silence, and then the old woman laughed, a short, dry sound with no fear in it at all. "Did he?" she said. "Adelaide, listen to me. I had your grandmother examined by a physician the same week she signed, because I knew this man, and I knew this day was coming. There's a competency letter in the file, dated 3 days before the trust. He just walked into a fight I prepared for 30 years ago." A pause. "Send Renata to my office first thing. I'll give her the whole file certified. Let him have his pending action. We'll resolve the cloud before your birthday, and then the conveyance goes through exactly on schedule. He outthought a dead woman. He's going to lose to her, too. I want you to know that this is the moment the story actually turned, and it turned in the dark, on a phone, between 2 women my father had spent his life underestimating. By Friday, Renata had filed the competency letter and the probate record and moved to dismiss his action as frivolous. The cloud cleared. The conveyance would happen on my birthday after all. But the bank hold and the lawsuit told me something I hadn't fully let myself believe. He knew. Whatever doubt I'd held on to, whatever maybe he forgot I'd been protecting him with, was gone. A man does not race to empty an account and cloud a title for a thing he believes is innocently his. He knew exactly what he'd done in 2012, and he was willing to burn the family business to the ground in legal fees rather than let his daughter have what his mother left her. And the worst part, the part that hardened me for good, came the next morning. My father came to the shop himself. He almost never did anymore. He came in through the back, into the office, and he closed the door, which he had also never done, because closing a door meant we were equals in a negotiation, and he didn't believe we were. "You've been to see the Halloran woman," he said. So he had people watching. Of course he did. "I have," I said. I kept my hands flat on the desk. He sat down across from me, in the lower chair, and for a second I thought he might say something true. Instead, he did the thing he'd done my whole life, which was to rewrite the room until he was the one who'd been wronged. "That building is mine," he said. "I worked that floor for 30 years. My mother put it in some trust because a lawyer talked her into it when she was old and frightened. You think a piece of paper means more than 30 years of my life? His voice climbed. You'd take it from me? Your own father? After everything? I haven't taken anything, I said. I haven't filed anything. You filed a lawsuit. You tried to empty an account. I've done nothing but read what was already true. You'll embarrass this family. He leaned forward. You'll humiliate me in front of everyone over a technicality. Is that the kind of woman you are now? Is that what they taught you out there? And here is where he won, temporarily, because I let him. I should tell you I stood up and crushed him with the facts. I didn't. I was tired, and he was my father, and the 9-year-old at the kitchen table was still in the room with us. So I said quietly, I don't want to fight you, Dad. And he heard it as surrender, the way he always heard okay and sure as surrender, and he stood up satisfied and said, Good. Then we'll have a nice party and you'll be gracious, and this will all blow over. He walked out believing he'd handled me. I sat there afterward feeling like I'd lost, even though I knew on paper I'd already won. That's the thing nobody tells you about a man like my father. He can make you feel beaten in a fight you're winning, right up until the moment you stop letting him narrate it. That afternoon, my mother called me. My mother, Eileen, who is not a villain in this story, but is not exactly innocent either because she spent 40 years agreeing with my father in the same way my father agreed with 1965. She called me crying. Your father's not well, she said. The doctor saw something on his heart again. He's scared, Adelaide. That's what this party is. He wants to get his affairs in order while he can. Don't make this hard for him. Just let him have his day. And for about an hour, that worked on me. Because here's the thing about people who hurt you slowly. They get sick. They get scared. They get old in front of you. And the part of you that's still 9 years old at a kitchen table wants nothing more than to be the good daughter who makes it easy. I sat in my car outside the shop and I genuinely considered calling Renata and telling her to send the quiet letter, the one nobody would see, so my father could keep his pride and have his day and never know I knew. Then I made myself do the math one more time. Not the money, the other math. He had read Diane Halloran's letter in 2012. He had been not well and scared. Approximately never in the 11 years he collected rent on my building. He was not getting his affairs in order. If he were getting his affairs in order, the building would be in the will he was about to enact. And it wasn't, because he was about to hand my brother a company with no floor to stand on purpose, because admitting the truth was more frightening to him than his own heart. Mom, I said, I'll be there. I'll let him have his day. I let her hear what she wanted to hear. Every word of it was true. I just didn't tell her whose day it was actually going to be. That night I called Renata and asked her one question. Will you come to the party? There was a pause. As your lawyer or as your friend? Both, I said. Bring the file. The morning of the party I got there at 9 to set up chairs because Adelaide sets up. I want you to picture it because I picture it all the time. Me, alone in the backyard at 9 in the morning, unfolding 40 chairs in 2 long rows, knowing what was in the canvas bag in my car. The banner, the coffee, the deviled eggs. I did all of it. I did it carefully. I have never been better at being the help than I was on the last morning I would ever be the help. Renata arrived at 1:30. She wore a gray suit in a yard full of summer dresses, and nobody noticed her, which was the point. I introduced her as a friend from my old firm. She shook my mother's hand and complimented the banner and took a seat near the back with a plain canvas bag at her feet, and she waited, calm as still water, the way she'd waited 11 years to read a dead woman's letter out loud. Curtis arrived at noon in the truck on the lawn. My father took his higher chair at the head of the table. The toasts came. My uncle, the burgers, my mother dabbing her eyes. There were 2 small cruelties before the big one, and I want to give them to you, because they're the kind of thing that only stings if you've lived it. The first was the cake. My mother had ordered a sheet cake from the grocery store, and across the top, in blue icing, it said, "Congratulations, Curtis." Not, "Happy Father's Day." Not, "Thank you, Walter." Congratulations, Curtis. They'd had the cake decorated for the handover before they'd told a single guest what the handover was. I'd been cutting the coffee for a party that was secretly my brother's coronation, and the cake had known before I did. The second was the seating. There was a place card at the head table for Curtis, right beside my father. There was no place card for me. I found this out because I was the one setting out the place cards. I held my own absence in my hand, and I set the rest of them down anyway, the way I'd set everything down for 11 years. A neighbor, an older woman named Ruth who'd known me since I was small, found me by the coffee and squeezed my arm. "You do so much for this family, honey," she said kindly, not knowing she was holding up a mirror. "I don't know what they'd do without you." I smiled and refilled her cup. In about an hour, the whole yard was going to find out exactly what they'd do without me. And then my father stood up and reached under his chair and brought out the green folder, and the yard went quiet, and 40 faces turned, and I felt my whole body go very calm, the way it does right before the part of the audit where the numbers finally line up and you know exactly what you're looking at. "Well, while everyone's here," my father said, "I've got an announcement." He set the folder on the table. He opened it. Inside, just as Renata had guessed, was a transfer agreement. He'd had it drawn up. He held it up so the back row could see there were papers, even if they couldn't read them. "Lawrence Print has been a Brenner business for 31 years, he said, "and it's going to stay one. Today I'm handing the business to my son, to Curtis. He's going to carry the family name forward." There was applause, real applause from people who didn't know. My uncle whooped. Curtis stood up and did a little wave, the parade float wave, the one from the lawn. My father turned to me. This was the part he'd planned. I could see it in his face, the small, mean pleasure of it. "Adelaide, sweetheart, you've kept the books so well all these years." He slid a pen across the table toward me. "You'll witness the signature. Right here. And don't you worry, you'll always have a place. A son keeps the business." He smiled at the whole yard. "You were always just help. Good help, but help." 40 people heard him say it. I want you to know I didn't flinch. I'd had 6 weeks to not flinch. I looked at the pen, and I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go as a witness to my own erasure, and I picked the pen up, and I set it back down, unsigned. "No," I said. Just that at first, not loud. The way you say a number that's simply correct. The yard didn't go silent yet. People thought I was being emotional. My mother started toward me. Curtis laughed, the same laugh from the lawn, and said, "Come on, Addie, don't make this weird." That was the moment the laugh stopped meaning anything. "Dad," I said, "before Curtis signs, there's one thing he should know about the business he's taking. And honestly, so should everyone here, since you've made it public." My father's smile held, but it had stopped being comfortable. "Adelaide." "The business operates out of the building at 14 Hartwell Street," I said. "Curtis is about to own a print shop. I just want to make sure he understands he won't own the floor it stands on." That's when it went quiet. The real quiet. The refrigerator stops humming quiet. "What is she talking about?" Curtis said to my father, not to me. He always asked Dad, never me. My father's voice dropped to the register he used on people who'd crossed him. "This is not the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. "You chose it. 40 people, a toast." I looked at Renata. She stood up, gray suit, canvas bag. She walked the length of the yard between the 2 rows of chairs, unhurried, and she set the bag on the table next to the green folder, and she took out a single document and laid it down. "My name is Renata Voss," she said. "I'm an estate attorney, and I represent Adelaide Brenner." She did not raise her voice once, the entire time. "This is a certified copy of the recorded deed for the property at 14 Hartwell Street. The legal owner of record is the Constance Brenner Family Trust, established in 2011 under the will of Constance Brenner, deceased and probated in this county." She set down a second page. "This is the trust instrument. It names a single residual beneficiary to whom the property conveys outright and automatically upon a date certain. That beneficiary is Adelaide Brenner. That date certain is today." She let it land. She'd timed it the way my father had timed his toast. "It is Adelaide's 36th birthday," Renata said. "As of this morning, the building belongs to her." Now my father exploded, and that's the part you wait a whole story for, the inversion, the calm daughter and the shouting father, and I'm telling you it happened exactly like that. "That's a lie," he said, on his feet now, the green folder forgotten. My mother left that building to me. I've run that business for 30 years. Renata laid down a third page. This is a letter, she said. Certified mail, sent February 9th, 2012 by the estate's attorney Diane Halloran to Walter Brenner at this address. She turned to my father. It informed you in writing that the building was held in trust for your daughter, that you were permitted to operate the business there, and that the property would convey to her on her 36th birthday. She set down a small green card. This is the return receipt. That's your signature, Mr. Brenner. You signed for this letter 11 years ago. The yard made a sound, 40 people exhaling at once. My father snatched the green card off the table. He held it close to his face. I watched him recognize his own handwriting, the signature he'd put there 11 years ago, and told himself he'd forgotten, and I watched the recognition cost him something. This is taken out of context, he said to the yard, not to me. She's twisting a paperwork thing. My mother wanted me to have that building. Everyone knows that. Everyone here knows me. That was the wrong thing to say, because he'd just invited the room to weigh in, and the room had known him a long time, and the room started to turn. I want to tell you about the witnesses because they turned one at a time, and that's how you know it was real. My uncle, the one who'd whooped, leaned forward and looked at the green card over my father's shoulder, and his face changed. He sat back down slowly. He didn't whoop again. Then Diane Halloran stood up. She'd been there the whole time, in the third row, because I'd asked her and she'd driven the hour to come, and she'd sat through the toasts with her hands folded waiting for exactly this. She stood and she let the yard see an old woman in a cardigan, and she said, in a clear, flat voice that carried to the back fence, "My name is Diane Halloran. I was Constance Brenner's attorney for 30 years. I drafted that trust. I sent that letter. I have the entire file in certified form, including a physician's letter confirming Constance was of sound mind 3 days before she signed." She looked directly at my father. "Walter, you've spent 10 years telling this town I was a confused old woman who botched your mother's estate. I'm not confused. I never was. Everything Adelaide has said is true, and I've waited a long time to say so out loud." That was a witness turning. Half the yard had heard my father's version of Diane over the years. Watching her stand there, sharp as a tack, undid it in 30 seconds. Then another. A man named Gerald, who'd kept the books at Lawrence Print back in the 80s before my father pushed him out, was at the party because his wife was my mother's friend. He stood up too, slower, an old man getting to his feet. "Connie always said that building was for the girl," he said. "Always. Sat right in my office and told me, that building's going to Adelaide. She's the only one with the sense to keep it." I heard her say it more than once. We all did. He looked around. "Some of you were there. And here's the thing about a small town." 2 more people nodded. My mother's friend Patricia, who'd known my grandmother, said quietly, "She did say that, at my kitchen table." "I'm sorry, Eileen, but she did." 4 people had now said it out loud. My father's version of the world was coming apart in front of the only audience he'd ever performed it for, and the terrible thing about a performance is that it only works while the audience agrees to clap. My father turned to my mother. "Eileen, tell them my mother wanted me to have it." And my mother, who had spent 40 years agreeing with him, opened her mouth and nothing came out. She looked at the green card. She looked at Diane. She looked at me. And she said in a small voice, "Walter, you told me it was handled. You told me there wasn't a letter." That wasn't her defending me. It was worse for him. It was the one person who'd always taken his side, realizing, in public, that she'd been lied to for 11 years along with everyone else. He'd lost her in front of the whole town, and he hadn't even seen it coming. Curtis was still holding the pen. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he asked me a question directly. "Wait, so if I sign this, I'd own a company that has to pay you rent? Forever?" "That's the math," I said. And I should mention, the rent the business has been paying went into an account Dad controls, for a building it didn't belong to. I cut those checks. I have 11 years of them. I looked at my father. $3,100 a month. $409,000, give or take, on a building that was never yours to rent out. Curtis's face did something I'd never seen it do. He looked at the new truck on the lawn, and then at our father, And I watched him start to do his own math, slowly, for the first time in his life. The condo down payment, the trucks, the cabin where we'd all spent summers. I saw the moment he understood that the easy money he'd grown up on had a source, and the source was a building, and the building was his sister's, and the man who'd handed him all of it had been handing him stolen rent with a smile. He set the pen down on the table very carefully, like it had gotten hot. My father said the thing people like him always say when the floor goes, "I did everything for this family." And I gave him the only answer I had left, the calm one, the one I'd practiced in a parking lot with a sandwich I didn't eat. "You did everything for this family except read the letter you signed for." He came back one more time because men like my father always have one more move, and his was the lawsuit. "I've filed against that trust," he said, loud, to the whole yard now, trying to recover his footing. "It's not settled. A judge is going to look at 30 years of my life and—" You filed Wednesday," I said. "Renata filed your dismissal Friday with Gran's competency letter, dated 3 days before she signed the trust." I turned to Renata, who nodded once. "Your action is frivolous and it's already dead. You tried to empty the rent account Wednesday morning, too. The bank put a hold on it because the account name didn't match. I let that sit in front of 40 people. You've spent 4 days trying to take this from me in 3 different ways, Dad. Every one of them is in writing now. You keep leaving a paper trail and then forgetting you signed it." That was the moment the daisy line came back, the one Renata had said to me in her office 6 weeks before, except this time I said it, and I said it to him. "You don't have to take anything from me," I said. "I just had to stop giving it to you." He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. The numbers were the numbers, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding them where everyone could see. If you've ever had to stand in a room full of people who loved the wrong version of you and finally tell the true one, you know what that costs, and you know it's worth every cent. If this story reached you tonight, I hope it found you at the right time. Now let me tell you how it actually ended, because the loud part wasn't the end. The quiet part was. Curtis put the pen down. He never signed. The transfer he'd been promised was worthless the second everyone in the yard understood that the company came with a landlord. And the landlord was the sister he'd spent 11 years letting them pay $18,000 a year to ignore. My father didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that because I know you're hoping he did, and he didn't. What he did was worse and more human. He sat back down in his higher chair and he looked very old and very small, and he said, to nobody, "I built that." And the terrible thing is that he believed it. The way he'd believed it in 1994, when his mother bought the building he built his manhood on, and never thanked her either. The party ended the way parties end when something has broken. People found their cars. My uncle shook Renata's hand on the way out, which told me something. My mother cried, but not the way she'd cried on the phone. She came to me at the gate and she said, "Did you have to do it like that in front of everyone?" And I said, "He did it like that, Mom. I just answered in the same room." She didn't have anything to say to that, which was, in its way, the first honest moment we'd had in years. Here is the math of how it settled, because I promised you the numbers, and the numbers are the justice. I did not take Lawrence Print. I never wanted it. I owned the building free and clear the morning of my birthday, worth $410,000. My father still owned the business, so I became his landlord, formally, with a lease, and I set the rent at fair market value, which was actually higher than the $3,100 he'd been pocketing, and I made it payable to the trust. To me. Then I sent him an invoice. One invoice. For the back rent he'd collected on a building he didn't own, from the day Diane Halloran's letter told him the truth. Renata advised me the trust had a clean claim. I didn't sue. I didn't have to. I just put it in writing, the way he'd never put anything in writing for me, and I let him decide whether he wanted a courtroom to read his signature on that green card out loud. He paid. Over 18 months out of the business, he paid back $280,000, which is what we settled on. He paid it to the daughter who was always just help. The weeks after the party kept turning up new cards, the way these things do once the first lie cracks. A cousin called to tell me my grandmother had tried to give me a savings bond when I was 16, and my father had intercepted it and cashed it for the household. The boat from the rent account, it turned out. He'd told everyone he'd won in a fishing club raffle. There was no raffle, and the old bookkeeper, Gerald, mailed me a copy of a letter he'd kept for 30 years. My grandmother writing to him in 1994 that she was buying the building so Walter has somewhere to fail safely and putting it in trust so the girl has somewhere to land. She'd seen all of it coming. She'd built me a floor before I could walk. The hardest discovery wasn't about money. My mother came to the shop a month after the party, alone, and sat in the office and told me she'd known something was wrong for years, not the details. But she'd watched my father treat me like staff and Curtis like an heir, and she'd told herself it was just how men of his generation were, and she'd said nothing, because saying something would have cost her the quiet she'd traded her whole life for. "I let him write you out," she said. "I was so busy keeping the peace I forgot to ask who was paying for it." It wasn't an apology I could fully accept yet, but it was true, and true was new between us. Curtis got his consulting fee canceled the next quarter because I was the trust now and I wasn't paying $18,000 a year for a man to check on a building I owned. He didn't take it well at first. He showed up once, angry, and said I'd ruined the family. I told him the family had been ruined for 11 years. I'd just turned the lights on. He took a job selling the same trucks he liked to park on lawns. The last I heard, he was decent at it, and his wife told my mother he was happier than he'd been in years. Some people are better off when the thing they were handed gets taken away before it can finish ruining them. And the shop. This is the part that surprised even me. Within 3 months, my father couldn't run it. He'd never actually run it. I had. He didn't have the books in his head because the books had been in my head for 11 years. The first vendor renewal came up and he didn't know the terms. The school district called about the renewal and asked for me by name, and when they got him instead, they got nervous. And a $40,000 account does not like getting nervous. A press went down, and the service number he called was a contract I'd negotiated, and he didn't know it had a same-day clause, so he paid full rate for an emergency call that should have been free. In 1 quarter, he made more expensive mistakes than I'd let the company make in a decade. He came to me in October, not the higher chair version of him, the version that sat in the lower chair with the door closed. He asked me to come back and help with the books. The same words he'd used to demote me, except this time they meant something different because this time I owned the floor he was standing on and we both knew it. I didn't go back as help. We made a deal instead, a real one, on paper, witnessed by Renata. I bought the business from him at a fair valuation. I paid him a fair price, enough to retire on, and I did not lowball him because I am not him and because my grandmother's letter told me to land somewhere clean and I wanted to be able to look at the woman in that photograph. Lawrence Print became mine, building and all, the floor and the company, owner of record, Adelaide Brenner. The first year I ran it as owner, revenue went up 9% because for the first time the person making the decisions and the person who knew the numbers were the same person. I gave the 2 longtime pressmen a raise they'd been owed for years. I hired a young woman out of the community college to learn the books, and I teach her at a table in the back, the way my grandmother taught me, and I pay her more than my father ever paid me to run the whole place. I changed exactly one thing about the sign out front. Under Lawrence Print and Sign, in small letters, it now says, "Established by Constance Brenner, 1994. A customer asked me once who that was. I told her it was the woman who actually bought the building and that it had taken 31 years and a Father's Day for the sign to finally tell the truth. I hung Gran's photo by the front register where every customer can see her standing in front of her fabric store in 1979, arms crossed, not smiling, owning the place. Most days, at some point, I catch myself standing the same way. My father comes in sometimes. He sits in a chair that is exactly the same height as everyone else's, because I got rid of the high one. We don't talk much, but last month he watched me close out a $40,000 contract on the phone, the school district renewal, 8 years running, and when I hung up he said, "You always were the one with the head for it." It wasn't an apology. It was the closest his generation comes to one. I took it for what it was, and I went back to work. My father still comes in some mornings for coffee. We found a smaller, quieter version of each other to be around. He has never said sorry, and I've stopped needing him to, which is its own kind of conveyance, a thing that transfers to you automatically on a date you don't see coming. Diane Halloran retired last spring. I sent flowers and a card that said, "Thank you for finishing on time." Renata still calls me on slow nights. My mother and I have lunch now, on purpose, and we talk about my grandmother, who neither of us understood while she was alive, and both of us understand now. If you've ever been the one who held the whole thing together while someone else held the title, I want you to hear the only thing I really learned. Being underestimated is not the same as being powerless. The wound was never the building, and it was never the money. The wound was a whole childhood of doing the work and watching someone else get counted. What healed it wasn't winning. It was finding out in a dead woman's handwriting that I had been seen all along, and then deciding to see myself the same way and never wait for anyone's permission again. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is just the one who already read the deed. I'm Adelaide Brenner, and I was never the help. I was the owner who hadn't been told yet. Thanks for staying with me. Drop a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.